One of the biggest white-collar crimes ever was the theft of $450 million from the National Heritage Life Insurance Company. The perpetrators were a group of accountants, attorneys, and business people who, beginning in 1990, bought up national treasures and made them into personal piggy banks. Because all that was left of the National Heritage Life Insurance Company was box upon box of paperwork and a handful of auditors and former workers combing through them, it took authorities 4 years to finally catch on and another 5 years to sort it all out. The plot involved a renowned New York law firm, the Mafia, a strip club, and Sholam Weiss. He was sent behind bars for 845 years, more than Bernie was charged for. Bernie Madoff was serving 150 years in prison for a multi-billion-dollar fraud. Norman Schmidt got 330 years for his role in a huge investment scam. And then there's white-collar criminal Sholam Weiss, who wasn't due for release until November 2754. But he was released because of a presidential pardon. So what exactly did he do to deserve 845 years behind bars? And why was he forgiven? Let's find out. In the pantheon of white-collar criminals, Sholam Weiss, a rumpled businessman from New York, has earned his place among the giants. Weiss received among the longest federal prison term ever imposed, 845 years. He was sentenced on racketeering, money laundering, and fraud charges, all from his central role in an immense fraud scheme that siphoned $450 million from an insurance company, leading to its collapse. The 46-year-old Weiss, though, was not around to hear the sentence. On October 2000, while a jury in Orlando was deliberating on the 93-count indictment against him, the burly, bearded Weiss vanished. Now, he could be found only on the FBI's website, where he was featured on a wanted poster offering a $95,000 reward for information leading to his capture. Insurance regulators were offering an additional $25,000. Weiss, who built a lucrative plumbing supply business in Borough Park, Brooklyn, became both a criminal mastermind and international fugitive. He may seem curious to the casual observer, but this father of 5 and grandfather of 3 was no casual crook. Rather, he had emerged as one of the more gifted criminals, with a knack for fraud, fleeing, and hiding stolen millions. In fact, he had more than enough money to live comfortably as a fugitive, having fled with $25 to $30 million of the insurance company's money. The FBI had received some reports that place him in Israel and others that put him in the United States. Some evidence suggested that Weiss could be in Austria, Brazil, or Belgium. The FBI's poster noted that he had panic attacks and may be taking Klonopin and Xanax. Whatever his worries, he had apparently not let them interfere with a little excitement. Wherever he might have been, Weiss's corruption and dishonesty knew no end. He was in hiding, enjoying his millions in ill-gotten gains, while his minions faced incarceration. The sophistication and scope of his frauds were truly amazing. The scheme itself, in which a series of numbingly complex mortgage and stock frauds were used to loot the National Heritage Life Insurance Company, attracted little attention outside of Florida, where the majority of the insurer's mostly elderly policyholders lived, but it ranked as the largest insurance company failure caused by criminal acts in United States history. In addition to Weiss, 15 business executives and lawyers from Arizona, Texas, Illinois, and New York had either pleaded guilty or been convicted in the fraud case, and several were already serving long prison terms. So how did it all start? The fraud began in the early 1990s when a group of businessmen and lawyers hijacked the insurer. Using a variation on a simple check-kiting scheme, they bought the company with a check, and then, once they had taken over, simply lent themselves the money to cover the purchase price. After taking control in 1993, Weiss and several others stoked National Heritage into a juggernaut of fraud. They bought up worthless stocks and mortgages in a series of deals that sucked hundreds of millions of dollars out of the insurer. Much of the money in cash just vanished. Millions more ended up in accounts controlled by Weiss. When and where Weiss picked up his criminal skills is unclear. He grew up in Borough Park, where his father ran a fruit stand. Educated in yeshiva, where he spoke Yiddish, Weiss finished the equivalent of high school, but he did not learn English until he was in his late teens. He still speaks English with a thick Yiddish accent. After delivering fruit from his father's stand as a boy, he began doing construction work as a young man and bought Windsor Plumbing Supply in 1974 when he was 20. According to Weiss's testimony at trial, the company was then bringing in about $275,000 a year. By 1986, Windsor was doing $20 million in business. Weiss attributed it all to long hours and hard work. But by the end of the decade, Windsor had spiraled into debt and bankruptcy and eventually closed. By that time, Weiss had moved his family to Monsey, and in 1989, after 14 years of marriage, he and his wife Goldie separated. Then a wealthy man, Weiss signed a separation agreement that left his wife well provided for and included a proviso that he pay for a bar mitzvah and/or wedding for each of their 5 children, spending no less than $100,000 for each event. Windsor's failure apparently taught Weiss so much that he started hiring himself out as a bankruptcy specialist, advising other businessmen. It was then, in 1992, Weiss met some of the people with whom he would plunder national heritage. One was Michael Blutrich, a lawyer who was an owner of the topless club Scores on East 60th Street, which was then controlled by the Gambino organized crime family. Blutrich also served as the outside counsel for national heritage. He later admitted his role in defrauding the insurer and a variety of other crimes and became a government witness. The national heritage frauds were not the first time Weiss and Blutrich faced legal trouble together. In 1994, Weiss was indicted on mail fraud charges that he had falsely claimed that more than $1 million worth of bathtubs had been damaged in a 1986 fire at a company warehouse. He went to trial in federal district court in Manhattan, where Blutrich gave false information to prosecutors in an effort to prevent Weiss's indictment. But Blutrich's efforts, which he admitted to when he pleaded guilty to a series of crimes, were for naught. Weiss was convicted and sentenced to 8 months in prison. In 1996, Weiss was released to a halfway house, and it was then that he gave the government a glimpse of his propensity to flee and his ability to do so with ease. In early April, Weiss asked for a 4-day furlough from the halfway house to spend the Passover holiday at home in Monsey with his wife and children. Federal probation officials consented. Weiss, however, had something besides bitter herbs in mind. He persuaded Donald Trump's Atlantic City Hotel and Casino to fly him and a 23-year-old woman companion by Learjet to the gambling resort, where they stayed in a complimentary $700 a night suite and wagered $70,000. He was initially charged with escape for the 4-day romp, but the charges were dropped. The lawyer who represented Weiss during his trial in Orlando, Joel Hirshhorn of Miami, filed papers to withdraw from the case after his client fled, and seems to wish he could forget the entire episode. In the trial, his representation was aggressive, despite a sometimes difficult Weiss, who was often heard yelling at his co-defendants in the courthouse hallways and talking on his cellular phone. Such was Weiss's behavior that his lawyer felt compelled to point out to the jury during his summation that he was not on trial for being rich or rude. Weiss's courtroom demeanor endeared him to neither judge, jury, nor courthouse officials, and courtroom observers were speculating that Weiss would flee long before the October Sunday when he made his routine call to check in with pretrial services and then disappeared, jumping the $500,000 bond secured by his wife's house in Monsey. At Weiss's sentencing on the national heritage charges on February 15th, Judge Patricia Fawcett said that given the magnitude and repeated nature of the fraudulent acts, he should be removed permanently from society. Judge Fawcett devised the mammoth term by stacking one 20-year count on top of another, because under federal sentencing guidelines, she could not impose a life term. Apparently not content with the prison time, Judge Fawcett also fined Weiss $125 million in restitution to the policyholders of national heritage. The maximum sentence for Madoff wasn't surprising under the magnitude of the fraud. In meting out the sentence, the judge said he was sending a strong message, but at some point, a sentence several times life becomes moot. Nor is the sentence likely to deter budding Bernies. Few conmen believe they'll get caught. Does the threat of 150 years scare potential fraudsters more than 20 or 30 years? It seems a little far-fetched to think that it would. But as Trump left office, he issued a flurry of presidential pardons, which included clemency for Sholam Weiss, who had served 18 years. A White House statement that misspelled Weiss's first name as Shalom said that Trump had commuted Weiss's sentence because it was unduly harsh. He already has served more than 18 years and he was in poor health. The explanation echoed the pleas of supporters who had crusaded for Weiss's release, arguing that his prison term, originally 845 years and later reduced on appeal by 10 years, was wildly disproportionate, especially since he had repaid the $125 million he was convicted of stealing. But a few short weeks after his joyful homecoming, he suffered a stroke. He was able to get to a hospital in record time thanks to his family and received the life-saving treatment. Otherwise, Weiss could not be here with us today.